Absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. Katie Janik with AF Group, Accident Fund, United Heartland, uh, Comp West, Third Coast Underwriters. Those are some of our work comp brands. And really excited to be here today. Obviously, we have a partnership with Spencer Foundation, which we're super happy to have and continue this relationship with all of you. So thanks for joining. For those of you on the line, I am really glad to have you. And I think you'll just have a great opportunity to learn about some of those foundational pieces of information that you can add into your toolbox about workers' comp. And of course, if there's ever any follow-up questions, we like to consider ourselves a go-to. So please feel free to reach out to me if for whatever reason there's additional dialogue that you want about workers' compensation after this training. Tendeka can give you guys my contact information. So welcome, and I do like to use the chat just to keep things engaging and interactive. So a fun effort to kind of kick things off here. Would you rather have cookies or cake? Go ahead and drop that in the chat for me. Just a little fun little opener here. Would you rather have cookies or cake? I would say I definitely am a cake fan, and I'm going to throw cheesecake out to the group here. That is my favorite. Feel free, chime in if you have a favorite. If I had to pick a favorite cookie, it would probably be the good old Oreo cookies. We've probably all had those before. So yeah, just fun little thing. I see quite a few of you are liking the cookies, and Mike Maurer there with the chocolate chip. Whenever I think of chocolate chip, I think of like the homemade, warm, fresh out of the oven chocolate chip. But enough about cookies and cake. This is why we're here, is for Work Comp 101. And I'm really going to just talk about the basics and the foundational pieces of that. So feel free to interact and engage with me in the chat. If there's questions, obviously drop those in the chat or raise your hand like Tendeka mentioned, and we will definitely connect with you on those. So we're going to kick things off with the history of workers' compensation. I'm going to talk about the work comp benefits that an injured worker would receive, and we'll discuss employer's liability. I'll lead into talking about claims and loss control and the experience mod, which really leads us right into talking about a return to work program and why having one is really so important. Lastly, we'll talk about pure premium rate changes. So without further ado, I have a little video for you.
Hi there! Since you're watching this video, we're guessing you're interested in knowing what workers' compensation is all about. Well, you're certainly not alone. Work comp isn't something people think about very often, and when they do, they likely have more questions than answers. Over the next few minutes, we're going to provide you with a brief history of work comp to help you understand why it's needed. Workers' compensation is insurance that provides protection for employers and employees. The concept actually began hundreds of years ago with pirates. That's right, pirates. Like, arr, that kind. In the days of yore, a pirate's life was not easy. The job of sailing the seven seas, robbing, pillaging, and generally being despicable was not only dangerous, it was downright lethal. To motivate the workforce, ship captains like Blackbeard, Redbeard, and prematurely Graybeard developed a compensation system to help those injured during the course of their less than upstanding business. If you lost an arm, you were paid a fee in gold. Lost an eye? That was covered too. In fact, a complete fee schedule was developed to cover almost any injury. We're guessing maybe 3 doubloons if you need that little peg leg set up. The result? Ship captains, the employers, were able to keep a steady workforce, and pirates, the employees, were motivated to keep working without walking the plank. Now, obviously, in the modern world, most employees are not pirates. Well, copyright issues aside, modern working conditions have fortunately improved far above the days of piracy, and so has workers' compensation. Today, employers purchase work comp coverage from insurance companies, similar to how you might buy personal auto or home insurance, and the policy protects employees who work for that employer. If someone gets hurt on the job, the insurance company pays for lost wages, medical benefits such as doctor's appointments and medications, and other benefits to the employee. The result is twofold. First, employers are protected from big claims that could wipe out their business. And second, employees receive the care they need to recover, return to work, and get back to the business of leading healthy lives. And that, my friends, is workers' compensation insurance. And it's something our company has provided with excellence for more than 100 years.
Every time I see that video, I just love it so much. It just really is hitting on so many different things. And I'll kind of talk about that a little bit more as we continue through the presentation today, but really just hitting on those foundational pieces of workers' compensation. And so we're going to touch on the history of workers' compensation. You know, how has it evolved over time? And Tindek is going to send out a poll question to you guys. Who was the first group of people that used a work comp system? And go ahead and just select your best guess. You may have been given some hints in that video. Nice job. That means you all were paying attention. So yes, the pirates were in fact the first group of individuals to really use a work comp system, as you saw in that video. And there's really been an evolution of workers' compensation developing over the years. And, you know, you see that there in the 1700s, pirates were the first group to use that work comp system. You know, it was a really dangerous job working on the ships, losing an eye, a hand, and essentially they came up with this system to get compensation for the body part that was injured or lost. And as things evolved into the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution, think about the types of work that was happening during that time. Feel free to drop in the chat if you are familiar with any of the work that was happening during the Industrial Revolution. In some of these instances, the work environment wasn't the best, right? People were working in dangerous machine shops, on the railroad. There was even times when children were working in dangerous work settings. So as you can imagine, lots of injuries were occurring. People were getting injured, and they just didn't have those resources to help advocate for themselves. So as we transitioned into the 1900s and the 2000s, you know, a transformation started to happen. One big event that impacted change was the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist tragedy. And I'm just going to touch a little bit on details regarding this story, but I encourage you to read up on it. It is an impactful and empowering story for change and evolution that happened in the work comp industry. There was a business located on the top floor of a very tall building in downtown Manhattan. And the owners of the business, they didn't really care to make safety a priority for their employees. And the building wasn't really up to code. And unfortunately, the fire exits were locked in fear of employees taking too many breaks. Out of the 2 elevators, only one was working, and the building caught on fire. Essentially, people couldn't get out. And sadly, 146 people lost their lives that day. Really, the only positive thing that came out of this tragedy was it caught the attention of the government, and it kind of jump-started the work comp transformation. And really, all of these events led into impacting what workers' compensation is today. So when we think about workers' compensation today, it really balances the goals of both the employer and the employee. The employer is protected from litigation, and the employee is provided the work comp benefits in the event that they are injured or there's an accident occurred while they're at work. So when we think about that, it's really beneficial to both the parties. So workers' compensation promotes industrial safety and has these guidelines and these expectations for business owners. And really, that's where that partnership with OSHA comes into play, to have these set safety standards so that we can avoid accidents from happening, like the Triangle Shirtwaist tragedy and other events. There's you know, policies and procedures in place to avoid injuries from happening. And Again, that's in partnership with OSHA, that's in partnership with a loss control consultant at an insurance carrier, and essentially they're going to help support these initiatives. So when we think about the state that you're doing business in, really your choices for work comp coverage can vary. Some states only have private carriers that sell work comp. These are the gray states. An example is Michigan. Some states require workers' compensation coverage to be provided exclusively by the state. So these states are called the monopolistic states. They have the red M on them. An example is Ohio. In some states, you have a choice of getting work comp coverage from a state fund or a private carrier. These are the blue states, and an example is Texas. Oops, excuse me. So when we think about workers' compensation today, really there's some jurisdictional guidance and things like that on what the states allow different carriers to do when there is an injured employee. And in certain scenarios, you get a choice of what state as the injured worker you want to collect your benefits in. So for example, in my role, I work for a company that's headquartered in Michigan, but I live in Wisconsin. And let's just say that I'm traveling for work and I'm out in California and I get injured on the job. Technically, the choice of law provision, which you see on the screen here, allows for me to choose which state I want to collect my work comp benefits from. So typically, the injured worker will choose the state with the best benefits. And again, this is just highlighting the options that are available to injured workers. So when we think about the work comp benefits, there's 4 different benefits that an injured worker can receive. And the first one, medical services. The second one, lost wages. So when somebody's injured on the job and they can't return to work, they're going to get compensation for replacement of their paycheck that they normally would be receiving. We have rehabilitation services and death benefits. So when we think about medical benefits ranging anywhere from the emergency room all the way to medications that they're receiving, diagnostics, and even home modifications. So if somebody has a significant injury and they are now in a wheelchair and they need the ability to get in and out of their home, they have the ability to get a ramp installed so that they can come in and out as they need for life and appointments and all of those things. So again, medical benefits, they're activated as soon as an injury happens. The goal is to get that injured worker the medical attention that they need. When we think about the compensation benefits that are available to an injured worker, it's normally about 2/3 of their average weekly wage. So it's going to be based off of the money that they were currently earning from their employer, what's been earned in the last 24 months. There's a calculation that's done to identify how much they're going to receive in their paycheck. And then ultimately they're paid these benefits after a waiting period. So some states say that the first 3 days of that waiting period are unpaid. Some say that 5 days are the initial waiting period days where they're unpaid for those days. And in certain states, they provide a retroactive waiting period. So if you're off of work for a more significant time, like 14 or 21 days off of work, the state says that the carrier can go back and pay you for those initial waiting period days. So those first 3 days or 5 days that are unpaid, you would then be reimbursed for those days. So it really just all depends on the state statutes that are in place. And you can see on the screen, there's 4 different areas of dollar amounts that are paid out depending upon the status of that injured worker. So if an injury is significant enough for a doctor to take an employee off of work, that is considered temporary total disability, where that individual is temporarily totally off of work, unable to return to work due to the disability of their job, their injury. In the case where somebody's able to return to work, maybe part-time hours or for a lower dollar amount based off of the work that they're doing, they're going to receive that temporary partial disability. They're being partially compensated for what they're not earning because their employer maybe can't accommodate the full restrictions that the doctor has in place. The third one there, permanent partial disability, is really usually paired with maximum medical improvement, representing that MMI. And maximum medical improvement is really when somebody's been ongoing for receiving treatment for their injury and they've reached maximum medical improvement. It kind of speaks for itself. In cases where the doctor has identified, we've done all that we can do for you, and based off of the injury that you have, you've reached maximum medical improvement. And depending upon the injury and the state in which that occurs in, the doctor might give a disability rating. And there's a calculation that's done with those average weekly wage amounts and those kinds of things. And that permanent partial disability could be a one-time payment to that injured employee, or it could be a payment weekly until the dollar amount runs out. It really all just depends on the state statute and what they have in place. And then lastly, that permanent total disability is really when there's a life-altering injury that happens at work, really debilitating the individual that they're unable to return to the workforce at all. And they're going to be receiving those permanent total disability benefits to them to help support them. And if there's any dependents, it would be for them as well. So again, these are all in place, known as indemnity benefits or lost time wages. And this is really that supplemental income if an individual is off of work and not receiving their normal paycheck. So rehabilitation benefits, it's kind of self-explanatory. We're all familiar with the normal physical therapy, maybe occupational therapy. This is going to cover those resources for the individual to recover. However, something that maybe not everybody is familiar with is the vocational training that's available to injured employees who are unable to do the job or tasks that they were doing when the injury happened. So vocational training is going to help them develop and learn new skill set, be able to market themselves and kind of pivot their career path so that they can return and rejoin the workforce and be active members of society. And so it's really a great benefit that the states provide to injured workers if they're needing kind of a shift in what they're capable of doing and still being able to work. And lastly, here we have the death benefits. Unfortunately, there are catastrophic events that occur where employees lose their life, and there's benefits to help support the funeral and the burial to those individuals. The states identify that there's a certain dollar amount paid out to the families to go through that process. So it could be $3,000 for a funeral, $10,000. Some states give up to $15,000. It's a dollar amount that the states have identified is a responsibility of the carrier to pay out to those surviving family members. There's also at times a benefit that's paid out to the spouse or dependents. So if there's children involved under the age of 18 in most cases, there's going to be that financial dollar amount to help support them, because obviously there's loss of earning capacity with that individual no longer being around to provide a paycheck to help support their family. So all of those things are taken into account with the different state statutes of what they're doing to set the expectations of what the carrier is responsible for covering for them. Again, if there's any questions or anything, feel free to drop those in the chat. As we lead into employer's liability, really just looking at the coverage that's provided. The best way to understand employer's liability is if we look at work comp as kind of that Part A coverage, and then employer's liability is the Part B coverage. So meaning if an injury or an incident or an accident isn't covered under the work comp umbrella, it could be covered under the employer's liability. Employer's liability is also known or commonly referred to as stopgap or stopgap coverage. Kind of when one umbrella doesn't cover something, there's another umbrella that does. That's kind of the easiest and simple way to understand that. So claim services, let's take a look at this. So what do we do, or what can policyholders do or business owners do when an injury happens? Really the first most important initial piece is getting that injured worker the medical attention that they need. That is definitely the most important thing. And then next we encourage reporting the claim, and we really encourage policyholders to use the customer portal. So logging onto the customer portal to submit that first report of injury, those accident details, As much information that can be provided within that portal is really helpful for the claim adjuster to begin their claim handling process and their investigation on determining the details and facts related to the injury and if it's in fact a covered loss. We also ask that policyholders provide if there's any injured worker restrictions that need to be accommodated, if there's any return to work slips, they can use that portal to update the document right into that portal. Claims adjuster of what's going on with that injured worker and their treatment plan and recovery and all of those things. So when we think about workers' compensation claims and lag time reporting, it's really influenced by what you see here. So when we think about the longer it takes for a claim to be submitted, the higher the costs for that claim are going to be. And so we really encourage to think about it as if the injured worker is feeling well taken care of, they're probably going to be a little bit more compliant with that recovery process. And we really want to show a lot of empathy for our injured workers and making sure that they're getting the care that they need to get them back to work and back to life. And so you can see here, it's just kind of some quick data here that the longer it takes for that claim to be submitted, the higher it is. So curious if any of you on the call, feel free to drop in the chat and you've connected to a doctor online. I know I have done this before. It's really easy and convenient. Avoiding an urgent care at all costs is definitely on my mind for ease and efficiency. I don't know about you guys, but well, essentially what we have found is a simple and great way to provide that same service to our policyholders and to our injured workers. And we at AF Group call this telecomp care, which is our telemedicine. Really is a positive way to help get care to those injured workers right on the spot, right at work. In most cases, these individuals don't even need to leave work to go to a clinic or to the emergency room. We're avoiding lots of costs by doing that. And those claim costs have been cut in half. Reporting those claims have been significantly cut in half because when you call the telecomp care line, which is 24/7, 365, you're connected directly with a nurse triage line. And that nurse is going to give that injured worker guidance on how to essentially treat the injury that happened. And in most cases, that nurse can give guidance on really self-care treatment, whether that's a small cut or wound, keeping it clean and dry and those kinds of things, and following up within 24 to 48 hours to see how things are going. It's a really smooth way to get the injured workers the care and guidance that they need for their recovery plan. So we really love the telecom care program, and the policy holders who have enrolled in the program have really seen positive and early returns on this investment. And we really encourage that. So
yeah, and just a couple of messages that came in through the chat. So Andrew wrote, I've directed injured workers to telemedicine, especially during COVID. And Mike wrote, use telemedicine during the pandemic. So yeah, just a bit of feedback there.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. We got to keep up with the times, right? And so this is a great way to be able to do that and really to get treatment and guidance right away by calling a nurse triage line. So glad to hear that some of you have been able to leverage that. Really great. So when we think about the workers' compensation claims and that investigation that claim handler is initiating when they receive the information, is really identifying, is this a compensable injury? Is this something that the insurance carrier is responsible for covering based off of the policy that's in place? And so when we think about workers' comp, we really want those employee injuries to arise out of employment, meaning that the origin or the cause of the injury was really directly connected with that employee's job tasks, their responsibilities, their duties, whatever they're responsible for when they're at work. So arising out of employment and in the course of employment. So really referring to the time and place in which the injury occurred. So was the injury or was the employee on the clock? Were they at an approved facility? Were they an employee who travels for work? Are they a driving employee who goes from place to place? All of these facts and details influence the compensability. So for example, if a maintenance worker was going to check on a sprinkler head that wasn't working and slipped and fell due to water on the ground, this example would meet both criteria arising out of employment and in the course of employment, and therefore would be compensable. So again, we just want to provide as many details as possible to that claim adjuster to make sure that they can have the information that they need to determine what can be provided to that injured worker and get them the help that they need. So workers' compensation reserves, what are they and what does it represent? So when we think about the reserves, this is really the financial dollars that are set aside by the carrier to pay for the upcoming bills that are going to be received for that claim. So when we think about going to the doctor's visit, we know a couple weeks later there's a bill coming in the mail. That's the same case when it comes to work comp injuries. In most cases, carriers set kind of a timeline on when those reserves are being set. After you have a strong understanding of that claim assessment, what is the treatment plan, you have a better idea of what those reserves should be. So usually those are set within the first 7 to 14 days, really as soon as that information is received and the claim adjuster has an understanding of what expenses are going to be coming through. So we do have a poll question Tindek is going to send out. Which items below would be included in a work comp reserve? Loss adjustment expenses, legal fees, assessment of a claim's value, or perhaps our good old friend, all of the above.
And hopefully you all can see the poll. If not, let me know, or try minimizing your screen. Try hitting escape and minimizing your screen. Hopefully you'll see it. All right.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. So all of the above. So loss adjustment expenses, legal fees, assessment of a claim's value, these are all included in the reserves. And ultimately, it's all a part of that claims assessment value, right? So reserves are going to be impacted by the medical expenses, those lost wages that we talked about, different loss adjustment expenses like those legal fees, and they're really all subject to change. It depends on what's happening with the injured employee's recovery plan. Is their recovery going really well? Great physical therapy and things like that, that's going to help get them to where they need to be. Or perhaps maybe the physical therapy isn't going so great and they're now needing surgery. That's obviously going to increase the expenses. It's going to increase those reserves. And so they're really subject to change. You might have an injured employee who's primarily Spanish speaking. Well, we're going to have some additional expenses with paying for an interpreter to be on some of those phone calls, or in some cases, an interpreter is going to a doctor's visit with them to make sure that that injured employee knows what's going on with their recovery and their treatment plan, and so that we can get them back to life and back to work as well. And so really just understanding that these are the things that make up the reserves that pay the bills associated with the medical bills that are coming through. So let's take a look at loss control services and experience modification. I'd love for you to put on your loss control hat. Consider thinking about addressing hazards or looking for unsafe potential environments. Feel free to drop in the chat some things that you're seeing in this image, some hazards that are concerns in this warehouse. Of course, I'm going to cover some of them, but feel free to drop them in the chat and to everyone, and we'll see those come through. But if we look right here, there's lots of boxes. Some of them are leaning over, definitely not safe. These could probably fall on somebody. That's not necessarily the proper way to stack those pallets. The aisleways don't really look clear. It's hard to tell if there's something going to be falling out of that cylinder up top. Not sure if somebody's coming around the corner. Looks like there might be a spill further down in the warehouse there. Just opportunities for improvement when we think about the work environment that's here and available to the employees that work in this warehouse. And so we want to do what we can to move things forward. So when we think about this image here, we've got a worker sitting on top of a ladder. Probably not the safest spot to be sitting, right? So I think usually on ladders it says clearly do not sit here. I don't see any gloves or PPE. Is this in fact a maintenance worker? Is the electrical turned off? All of these things are going to be things that loss control is going to partner with our policyholders to help give guidance on what they can do to help create a safe environment for their employees and to really embrace a culture of safety within their organization to prevent and avoid injuries from happening. So that safety culture is really the main objective of influencing policyholders and business owners to make a priority for their employees. And we really encourage partnering with loss control to help in the development of a successful safety program within the organization and really focusing on that safety culture from the top down. And recognizing that all employees are responsible for safety is really going to influence the work environment for these individuals. So what is experience rating? Experience rating is a way of tailoring the cost of insurance to the unique characteristics of the business. And so the experience mod was created to encourage a business to have a safe work environment. And when we think about that, the experience mod really goes hand in hand with loss control, because if a business is preventative and has the safety culture, like I've been talking about, they will likely have fewer accidents. And this will lead to an experience mod credit. Where on the flip side, if we have a business that doesn't partner with loss control and doesn't care about having a successful safety culture within their organization, they will more than likely have more accidents, which is going to lead to experience mod debits. And when we think about these credits and debits, it's really going to create a competitive advantage for these alike businesses. So how does loss control and a customer's experience mod create a competitive advantage? Well, this is really an important piece that not all policyholders recognize the importance of, and also agents recognizing this as a piece to convey to their customers. So a business that creates a culture of safety could have a better EMOD. And you can kind of see this here with restaurant A and B on the screen. And that EMOD will directly impact their bottom line financially. This can be used as that competitive advantage when comparing those like businesses. So if we look at what restaurant A is paying with a 1.23 EMOD versus what restaurant B is paying for premium at a 0.88, restaurant B is saving significant dollar amount in insurance, and they have the ability to reinvest that into their business. So to simplify this, the experience mod for a business is kind of similar to a credit score for a person. If you pay your bills on time and have good credit history, you will have a better credit score. And if you don't pay your bills on time and have a poor credit history, well, you probably are going to have a lower credit score. And same goes for an experience mod. The safer a business is, the more likely that business is to have an experience mod credit. So again, as you can see here, we can recognize that restaurant B probably has a better safety culture. They have less injuries, less incidences, they have a better EMOD, and they pay much less in insurance, meaning again that they can reinvest in their business. Maybe they have a better dining room, or they have a farm to table menu, or just top of the line products that they're offering their customers, creating that competitive advantage. All right, so return to work programs, why are they so important to have? Kind of just a quick hit here on this, just recognizing the importance of having a return to work program. The longer an employee is off of work, the harder it is to get them back to work. So when we considered employees who have been off of work for 12 weeks, there's only a 50% chance of them returning to work. And when an injured worker has been off of work for 6 months, that chance drops to below 20%. Again, very significant. And after a full year of being off of work, there's only a 1% chance of that injured worker returning to work, which is why it's so important to have a return to work program. And you really want to just consider having a return to work program in place and being prepared for when an injured worker is taken off of work by the doctor or is given restrictions, that you can in fact bring them back to work. So how to avoid those statistics that we just talked about is getting your clients, we want policyholders to really understand the importance of having a return to work program and having job descriptions laid out for them, having transitional work or modified work or reduced work options to provide to that injured worker or offer to them when the doctor is taking them off of work with some restrictions if the employer can't accommodate. So if the employer is prepared, they're ready to go, they are able to offer that employee these modified options or transitional work options, and they're able to return to work sooner. We've also found that having a return to work program and bringing employees back to work also helps in the recovery process. It reduces the length of time that their recovery is going on. That employee gets to be at work with their friends, they get to have a sense of community, camaraderie, and then they're also still receiving their paycheck, and that's really important for them. Helps to keep them motivated. All right, so before we take a look at pure premium rate changes, let's get that last poll question sent out to the group, Tandeka, if you don't mind. So true or false, pure premium rates account for administrative and other overhead costs that customers could potentially have. Go ahead and select your best guess. You got a 50-50 chance here.
Right. It's going to be a tight one. 50-50. Let's.
No pressure, you guys. All right, we're almost at 50-50. So those of you who selected false, great job. Premium rates do not account for admin costs. They actually account for the losses your client can expect to pay, or for that policyholder expected to pay for adjusting and settling the workers' compensation claims. Bureau, who determines the average rates to cover these workers' compensation losses by class of business. So again, always being compared to alike businesses. Each year, the rating bureaus establish a loss cost for each class code. So depending upon what the operations are of that business. And this is also based on the payroll and loss information reported to them by the insurance carriers. So the loss cost, or pure premium rate, is the amount needed to pay for adjusting and settling workers' compensation claims for each multiplier to cover their expenses and profits. So again, that rating bureau is really the one who kind of determines and influences what those rates are going to be based off of the hazards and exposures for each of those different class codes, depending upon what the hazards are for that business. So with a substantial decrease in pure premium rates, expected losses will decrease, but actual losses typically stay the same, resulting in a negative effect on your client's experience modification factor. So this can lead to an increased experience mod, and in turn, this can negatively impact that pure premium rate change for the customer. So if you're an agent, what can you do to help your clients offset these changes? It could be helpful for you to have your clients reduce their experience mod by implementing an early return to work program. This really reduces those injury costs. Environment to prevent those workplace injuries and losses. Again, embracing that culture of safety. You could also help your customers in developing and maintaining good hiring practices. schedule and plan in place for specific jobs is also going to help with that. And then it can be helpful to really just take a second of workers' comp, starting with pirates and kind of where we are today. The value of workers' compensation has grown, keeping employers and employees top of mind. By helping your customers embrace the safety culture, and this really impacts the financials. In order to do this, they really want to partner with loss control and implement a return to work program. So by doing all of these things can really be done by building and maintaining that relationship with the carrier and getting the support they need in order to maintain that safety culture. So when we think about that, it's really important to just maintain that relationship and reach out whenever there's questions or concerns or needing input or guidance on how to create that safety culture. So just want to take a moment to drop a little line here for our agency education website. Feel free to visit that. We have some on-demand e-learning courses. I am on the line here as well. If there's any questions that we want to talk about, we can do that as well. But thank you so much for your time today and your participation. I appreciate it. And if there's any questions coming through Q&A or anything, feel free to bring those up, Tendeka.
Yeah, so I do have a question. I know you mentioned it is super important to get that injured worker, back up and running and working again as soon as possible. Do you have any tips or tricks, or are some companies, doing certain things that seem to work with these regards in terms of just getting injured workers back in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a really great question. So I would say that having an active return to work program is going to probably be the first step. Because when you have something documented and you have a program in place, you can easily share that with employees. And so when you have that program in place and you have examples of things that employees might be doing when they have restrictions from their doctor based off of the work injury, it's easier for that company to go, oh, okay, this individual was injured at work. These are their restrictions. These are some of the things that they can do. So having that program in place, I would say, is the first step. The second step to that, though, is educating employees on the fact that the company has a return to work program, educating your employees on the process of what do they do when an injury happens, letting them know that their goal as business owners or as a company, our culture is to get you back to work. And so we're going to accommodate your restrictions, or we're going to do whatever we can to accommodate your restrictions, and educating employees on that. We oftentimes encourage that to be part of that onboarding and hiring process. So right from the get-go, they're being introduced to the safety culture that that company has, and they're probably going to be more likely to be a part of that safety culture and to create a safe environment for themselves and their teammates when they're educated on what the company's priority is. And so that would, I would say, would be the best recommendation. And if you have a policyholder who's not sure where to start, really encouraging them to partner with loss control. There's resources that are available to be able to provide to them, even stepping stones on how to get started with a return to work program and developing that from the ground up. So definitely partner with loss control. That is going to be a really important and essential way to get the support that they need.
Fantastic. Thank you. This is super informative. Anyone else in the group? Any questions about
Sure.
workers' compensation?
Yeah,
Go for it, Michael, and then we'll go to Princess.
No, thank you for the presentation, Katie. Very interesting. I was curious, similar to the back to work programs, if you had any insight or noticed trends in workers' comp claims relative to people going into the office a lot or people who are staying home. Is there any data or insights on that?
Yeah, great question. I don't necessarily have, data on those specifics, right? But what we know is that things are changing, right? Things have changed, right? We're in 2023. We've been doing this COVID and post-COVID thing, for quite a bit now. And so a lot of people are working from home. So obviously class codes, that would be like the main thing, right?
Oh, you changed
Is
it.
the
Okay.
class codes have changed. And so that would be another important piece for business owners and stuff to look at. If a lot of their employees are now working from home, that changes the risk, it changes the exposure, right? They're not on the road, they're not going into the office, those kinds of things. And so that is a big piece of what has changed over, time. But I don't necessarily have specific data on specific industries and things like that. So, but that is a
Okay.
really great question.
No, thanks, Katie.
Thanks for chiming in.
Great question. And then Princess, I think you had a question as well.
Hello. Yes, I have a question. Thank you, Katie, for the presentation. So I just wanted to find out what criteria is used to determine if an injury is significant or not, and what injuries does workers' compensation not cover?
Sure. So I think I'm hearing you say, how do you determine like if a injury is more significant or more severe or not? And so essentially carriers really rely on the provider to provide those details in the medical records that are being provided. So that's an important piece. And then we already know that there's a difference in severity when it comes to the body part, right? So injuring a finger might not be as severe as injuring a back or a knee or a shoulder. And so when injuries come through that are highlighting those body parts, it kind of flags our system to be able to highlight, hey, this could be a more significant injury. So it really just depends on what happened and what the details are for those different work environments, right? So the exposures and the hazards are going to influence the type of environments that those injured or those employees are working in and what types of injuries are likely to come out of those environments. So, as a carrier or as our underwriters are doing, they're really getting an understanding of what are the business operations, what are those employees responsible for, what are the tasks that they're doing, so that we have an understanding of what are the jobs that those individuals are doing, what are the risks and exposures for those folks. Of course, we want to do as much as we can to avoid injuries from happening, and that's where that partnership with loss control is so important, because it's really the preventative measures that we want to take to avoid the injuries from happening. The work comp side is really like the reactive side, right? We're taking care of injured employees after they've been injured. And so our loss control really wants to influence policyholders to make safety a priority and to really do whatever they can to avoid the injuries from happening. And then could you repeat the second part of your question, please, if you don't mind?
So the second part, I was asking, what injuries do you not cover? Does workers' compensation not cover?
What does it not cover?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a hard question, because there's there's a lot of details and facts that have to be gained from the policyholder of what happened, what were they doing, where were they located, what influenced the injury, all of those things. But if an employee is at work and they're injured at work, in most cases, if they're doing something that benefits the employer, those injuries and instances are going to be covered by the work comp policy. There's a lot of one-off scenarios, so it's hard for me to give you just like a clear answer for that, because work comp is really a gray area. It's not black and white. There's a lot of details and facts that go into that investigation to really determine that compensability. So I wish I could give you a straight, clear out answer, but of course there are instances when an injury or incident isn't covered, and it really just depends on the facts regarding the injury that happened, the individual, where they were, what they were doing. It's just going to be really variable based off of the scenario. Great
Thank
question.
you so much.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. Any other questions from the group before we wrap up the session? No questions. Awesome, awesome. Well, with that, join me in a virtual round of applause for Katie. That was super informative. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here and hanging out with us for an hour. Any final thoughts or comments, Katie, as we wrap up this session?
Oh, just thank you so much for joining. And I know you guys saw, you know, I highlighted our agency education website, but we do have monthly topics where we're doing webinars of 30 to 40-minute sessions. Feel free to check that out. It's called our Food for Thought Learning Series, free to anybody who wants to join. Share that with your colleagues if you have anybody else in insurance, and I'm sure Tendeka can maybe link that to the recording and things like that that's getting sent out maybe afterwards. But thank you so much. If you guys ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we really try to be a resource for anybody in the industry to reach out if there's questions or roadblocks, and we're all about supporting the next generation of individuals joining us in work comp and in insurance. So reach out if you need anything, and otherwise take care.
Fantastic. Thank you, Katie.
Thank
Awesome,
you.
awesome. So for everyone that's in here, as you know, we do these sessions on the second Thursday of every month. So our next session is going to be Thursday, May 11th at 1 o'clock Eastern. Our presenting company will be Marsh. And to obtain the Zoom details, simply register via the webinars tab on our website. So thank you again, everyone, for your time, and we will catch you next month. Bye.
Thank you, Tendeka.
Thanks, Katie. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.